Hidden away in the corners of the world are prisons known for their brutal and terrifying punishments, where inmates endure harsh, inhumane conditions, and the echoes of their suffering remain locked away behind towering walls. Imagine a world where human rights become non-existent, and the fate of inmates are tossed into the hands of sadistic correctional officers, whose mission differs greatly from rehabilitation. What becomes of hardened criminals who find themselves locked away in these hellholes? Join us as we unveil the 20 most brutal prisons with terrifying punishments. Number 20. ADX Florence, United States of America. From the moment it was set up and opened in 1994, ADX was designed to be the penitentiary for the most notorious and dangerous criminals in America. The United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, ADX, in the Fremont County of Colorado, is dubbed the Alcatraz of the Rockies, and is said to be the most secure prison and the one with no record of anyone ever escaping from it. Originally designed to accommodate up to 474 inmates, the facility has never reached full capacity and is notorious for housing inmates deemed too dangerous or high profile for even maximum security prisons. An example is Joseph Romano, who was sentenced to life in prison for plotting to murder the judge and prosecutor who sentenced him for a coin fraud operation. While in prison, he plotted to kill an undercover officer, leading to his transfer to Florence. Most inmates at Florence have extensive histories of committing violent crimes, including murder, against corrections officers and fellow inmates. Hence, they are kept in administrative segregation, spending up to 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. Small, soundproof cells made of concrete with a narrow slit for a window, which allows very limited natural light. During their hour outside the cell, they are kept under restraint and can exercise or make a phone call if permitted. Their diet is restricted for safety, and some cells have showers to minimize inmate handling by correctional officers. The extreme isolation and lack of human interaction at the prison lead to severe psychological effects on inmates, including depression, anxiety, hallucinations, and human rights organizations and mental health experts criticize the prison's conditions, arguing that they are a form of psychological torture. Number 19. Lante France. Before public executions were banned, Lante Prison in Paris, France, was known for public execution of prisoners by the guillotine. These executions were usually carried out in the courtyard of the prison until the act itself was banned in 1939. Established in 1867 with 500 cells, Lante is infamous for severe overcrowding, poor sanitation, extreme isolation, violence, and a high suicide rate of prisoners when the cells were increased to 1,000 in 1900. Presently, the prison has a total of about 2,000 inmates that are divided into 14 sections. Lante has housed notorious criminals, political prisoners, and famous inmates like Jacques Mesrine and Carlos the Jackal, and inmates like Michael Vaujour and Léon Daudet, who have escaped from it. Other inmates have reported cramped conditions, inadequate access to clean water, psychological stress from isolation, and abuse from guards. For a long time, attempts have been made to reform Lante with renovations to improve living conditions and reduce overcrowding, and this became possible when the prison was temporarily shut down in 2014 for renovations. However, the parole section still remained in operation. Number 18. Bangkok Prison, Thailand. The severely overpopulated Thai prison that was originally designed for 3,500 prisoners currently houses more than 8,000 inmates, most of them being long-term prisoners, foreign prisoners, and death row inmates. From outside, it looks like a regular prison with high walls and razor wires on the fence, but walking by the fence is enough to give you chills. The horror within is unmatched as prisoners of this facility are subjected to harsh labor and terrible living conditions. Inmates as much as 25 are crammed together in cells that are actually made for half of the number, and inadequate access to basic amenities such as medical care, nutrition, and hygiene are quite common. Inmates live under a strict regime, with many required to perform hard labor and wear leg irons, especially new inmates and those on death row. The prison is notorious for its high number of death row inmates, as high as 510 as at 2018, and executions mostly carried out by lethal injection. Life inside Bangkok is challenging, with minimal and poor quality food, inadequate health care, and reports of violence and abuse. The presence of many foreign inmates adds to the complexities, as they face additional hardships due to language barriers and being far from home. Despite some educational and vocational training programs, the overall conditions contribute to severe mental stress among prisoners. Number 17. Tadmore Prison, Syria. Originally built as a military barracks in the desert by French Mandate authorities in the 1930s, Tadmore was later converted into a prison and gained infamy during Hafez al-Assad's regime and continued under Bashar al-Assad. Tadmore was used to incarcerate political prisoners, including those opposing the Assad regime, symbolizing political repression, with the most infamous incident occurring on June 27, 1980, when an estimated 1,000 prisoners were executed in retaliation for a failed assassination attempt on Hafez al-Assad. Notorious for systematic torture, including beatings, electric shocks, and forced painful positions, the inmates at Tadmore face extreme inhumane living conditions, such as severe overcrowding, inadequate nutrition, and poor sanitation, leading to a high mortality rate. In the words of Palestinian writer Salameh Kaileh, who was incarcerated in Tadmore for 2 years, he says it is the worst place in the world, and argues that the place is not a prison because people have human rights in prison, and instead, he says one has nothing when in Tadmore, except fear and horror. Prisoners face brutal torture and whippings in the hands of the jailers who have the license to do anything, including kill the prisoners if need be. In 2001, the prison was closed down and reopened in 2011, only to be blown up by the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant in 2015. Number 16. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, California. Known simply as Alcatraz, the main prison in San Francisco Bay was built from 1910 to 1912 as a United States military prison. Alcatraz gained notoriety as one of the toughest federal prisons in the United States, operating from 1934 to 1963. Its remote location and strong currents made escape nearly impossible, earning it the nickname The Rock. The prison housed notorious inmates like Al Capone and the Birdman of Alcatraz, contributing to its infamous reputation. Inmates endured harsh conditions in small, solitary cells with minimal privileges and strict routines. Disciplinary measures included solitary confinement for rule infractions, leading to severe psychological stress among prisoners that were enough to test a person's sanity. Several inmates committed suicide while incarcerated at Alcatraz, a notable example being Ed Wutka, while others mutilated themselves as a result of the psychological trauma they faced there. The prison itself was so strict that the escape of 3 inmates inspired a movie called Escape from Alcatraz, about its tough security and harsh treatment of prisoners. The prison was closed in 1963, but was reopened to the public as a museum. Number 15. Chung Prison, China. Prisoners and inmates in Chung Prison, China, face dehumanization on all levels. From the moment they enter the prison, they are no longer addressed by name, but by numbers. The number, usually a 4-digit, is significant as the first 2 digits refer to the year you entered the prison, while the last 2 refer to your sequential number in prison. Prison inmates face several challenges like rationed food portions according to age, crime committed, social status outside and within the prison. Additionally, prisoners are only allowed to shower once a week or a month depending on your conduct, and also have to earn the right to exercise. The sleeping pattern is no better as inmates are under strict orders to sleep with their hands above the sheet with the light sun so the guards can see them clearly. With all these in mind, the most interesting fact about the Chung prison is that prisoners are not executed, and instead are put through hard labor, as it is believed they will be useful to the society in that regard. As a high-ranking prison, famous inmates of Chincheng include Kang Sheng and Xu Jie. Number 14. Black Dolphin, Russia. A prison where inmates are made to stand and are forbidden to rest or sit for roughly 16 hours daily from the moment they are up till bedtime definitely deserves a spot on this list. The Black Dolphin prison in Russia is a highly notorious criminal facility known for very strict measures and actions taken against prisoners. Being one of the oldest prisons in Russia, inmates are blindfolded on their way to the prison to eliminate chances of them planning escape by mapping out the prison. It is interesting to note that the prison houses the most notorious criminals, terrorists, cannibals, and serial murderers, and all of its inmates are serving a life imprisonment sentence. Daily, these prisoners are forced to exercise for 90 minutes, at which time their cells are searched for contrabands. The only things allowed for the prisoners are newspapers, radio, and books, along with them being fed sour soup 4 times a day. While a guard makes rounds every 15 minutes, prisoners are expected to respond to every command with "Yes, sir," a typical depiction of the tactical maximum control that exists there. The prison's high-security measures aim to tightly control inmates' movements and behavior, emphasizing discipline and preventing potential violence or escapes. Number 13. Rikers Island, New York. The amount of violence and abuse that goes on in Rikers Island Prison, New York, has brought the facility under huge scrutiny and several rulings against the New York government. One of the most notorious activities conducted in Rikers Prison is the Strip Search Act, where people arrested even on misdemeanor charges are forced to remove their clothes and subjected to private cavity searches that can take hours. Also worthy of note is the use of inmates, especially adolescents and teenagers, as enforcers. This activity has been subtly encouraged by the guards and correctional officers, as the enforcers are used to intimidate, attack, and subject fellow inmates to inhumane activities and punishments. It has been seen as a form of control amongst inmates, and has been proven to have devastating effects on inmates who have ended up at Rikers. Among these are other activities of force like physical assault when an inmate refuses to be strip searched, brutality, isolation, and even molestation by fellow inmates. Strict and extreme punishments by guards have often led to the death of inmates on more than one occasion. In recent years, there have been efforts to reform or even close Rikers Island due to its troubled history. Advocates for criminal justice reform argue for alternatives to incarceration and improvements in conditions for those held there. Number 12. Pmore Prison, South Africa. The violence that exists within the wall of Pmore Prison in Cape Town, South Africa is unrivaled. The hierarchy and gang groups within the prison determines whether an inmate survives or not. Due to the desperate conditions of the prison, there have been attempts by inmates to escape and break out. Pmore was originally made to detain about 4,000 prisoners, but there are reports of more than 7,000 inmates incarcerated there, with the numbers fluctuating daily. For this reason, overpopulation, crowding, and limited infrastructure are the least of the problems of the inmates. Poor living conditions, ventilation, and medical conditions lead to diseases like tuberculosis being common. As many as 40 prisoners are made to share a bungalow cell, with several people sharing double and triple bunk beds. With the presence of gang groups, inmates and rival gangs regularly experience riot outbreaks and violence, some of which also involves prison staff. Since the incarceration and release of South African former President Nelson Mandela, various human rights organizations have criticized Pmore for its treatment of prisoners, calling attention to issues of abuse and neglect. Number 11. Kamiti Prison, Nairobi. Prisoners at Kamiti Prison have been reported to die from poor health conditions and diseases. In 2009, a cholera outbreak in the prison led to the death of at least 8 prisoners in the facility. Originally established in 1955, Kamiti Prison was the incarceration point for several political prisoners in the 1980s and early 90s, as well as the execution place for most criminals imprisoned there. Since its setup, the prison has been known for very poor living conditions and scarcity of water, as inmates are made to fetch buckets of water daily for use. While it was built for 1,400 prisoners, it currently holds more than twice that amount, as within the prison, inmates face dehumanizing acts of violence in the form of sodomy and brutal beatings by warders. Fortunately, the living conditions have slightly improved since the government in 2002, but it is still one of the most notorious prisons to ever exist. Number 10. San Quentin, California. San Quentin in California is the oldest penitentiary in California. Established in 1852, it is the largest death row prison for male inmates in the United States. Known for hosting some of the most notorious and dangerous criminals in history, like Edward Bunker, San Quentin has a history that is dark. Because it is old, several facilities in the prison have become unhealthy, outdated, old and dirty, putting the life and health of inmates there in danger of diseases. The disturbing news, however, is that the prison inmates face lots of abuse from the guards and officers. Gangs and gangs-related violence is prevalent in the prison, leading to episodes of violent killings and attacks between inmates. Within the prison, inmates are subjected to several hours of isolation, torture, and beatings as a form of control from the correctional officers. The harsh environments faced by the inmates have inspired movies, documentaries, television programs, and books. Number 9. Camp 22, North Korea. When it comes to harsh treatment, capitalism, and total authority, North Korea already has a reputation. However, things take a step further when we think about the maximum security prison of the country. Camp 22, or Haryong concentration camp in North Korea, is infamous for its extreme secrecy and brutal treatment of inmates. Designed for political prisoners, including entire families under the guilt by association rule, the camp subjected inmates to hard labor in mines, factories, and farms under severe conditions. Even guards and prison staff at some point were victims of these harsh treatments, as reports from defectors and satellite imagery revealed widespread brutality, including physical abuse, torture, and executions. Inmates endured malnutrition, disease, and inadequate access to basic needs like food and medical care, leading to high mortality rates. Living conditions in Camp 22 were dire, with severe overcrowding and isolation from the outside world. Psychological torture, including threats and forced witnessing of punishments, compounded the physical suffering. Despite reports of its closure in 2012, the exact status of Camp 22 remains unclear, but it stands tall as a stark symbol of the severe human rights abuses within North Korea's prison system. Number 8. Tadmore Prison, Rwanda. If there is one thing Rwanda is known for, it is violence, brutality, and bloodshed. The real-life violence that shook the internet years ago and inspired a movie is what the country is still known for. Formerly called Mahanga Prison, the Tadmore Prison in Rwanda is notorious for its severe conditions, characterized by significant overcrowding, poor sanitation, inadequate food, and insufficient health care. It has been called the deadliest prison because about 7,000 inmates are crammed into the facility, leading to most prisoners standing in small cells, lacking proper space and access to clean water, leading to widespread diseases and malnutrition. Due to the extreme conditions, about 8 prisoners die every day from one disease or the other, including gangrene. The treatment of inmates in Tadmore Prison is harsh, with reports of physical and psychological abuse by prison guards. Inmates often endure beatings, intimidation, and forced labor under extreme conditions without proper compensation. Human rights organizations have raised concerns about these abuses, highlighting the need for significant reforms to address the violations of basic human rights and international standards for prisoner treatment in Rwanda. Number 7. El Rodeo, Venezuela. Lack of basic amenities is the major problem in El Rodeo Prison in Venezuela. Adequate food, clean water, and health care is a luxury and is oftentimes used as a weapon by the corrupt officials to control the violent inmates of the prison. Inmates and prisoners are treated according to their social standing and what they have to offer, And what this means is that prisoners of influence get slightly more fair treatment than nobodies or inmates seen as the bottom of the food chain. As a result of this, the bottom barrel faces harsher treatment from prison officials than others. Additionally, gang groups are quite common in the prison, and it determines whether or not an inmate gets access to the basics they need to survive in the hellhole. All of these, along with the unsanitary conditions caused by overpopulation, makes deadly diseases very common among prisoners, as well as gang riots, in a bid to secure the bare minimum available for the prisoners. Despite government attempts at reform and military attempts to control the riot, the issue remains the same, highlighting the need for a comprehensive transformation of the prison and life therein. Number 6. Pest Prison, Romania. Pest Prison in Romania stands out in history for its extreme brutality, particularly during the late 1940s and early 1950s under the communist regime. Initially designed to house political prisoners, it became the epicenter of a horrifying re-education experiment, a program aimed to forcibly convert anti-communist activists, intellectuals, students, and religious members to the regime's ideology through systematic and severe torture. The prison's environment was marked by extreme physical and psychological abuse, where inmates endured relentless beatings, electric shocks, and forced labor. Additionally, they were subjected to severe malnutrition, lack of medical care, and overcrowded living conditions, further exacerbating their suffering. The most infamous aspect of Pest Prison was the re-education experiment led by Eugen Surcanu, an inmate turned torturer. The program's goal was to completely dismantle the prisoners' identities and loyalties, using methods that included intense physical torture and psychological manipulation. Prisoners were forced to denounce and physically assault their peers, creating an atmosphere of constant fear and betrayal. This period, which lasted from 1949 to 1951, was characterized by acts of humiliation and degradation, where inmates were coerced into performing degrading acts against their will, with the effects leaving lasting psychological scars on the survivors. When details of the torture program emerged, it caused both national and international outrage, and the post-experiment trials held some responsible parties accountable, leading to the execution of Eugen Surcanu and others involved in the atrocities. Subscribers pick. Imagine being suspended in mid-air, with your body straining under harsh conditions, all in the name of punishment. This and scenarios worse than this are common in prisons and correctional facilities all over the world. The haunting image captures the brutal reality faced by inmates in some of the world's most notorious prisons, and they range from extreme isolation to physical torture and dehumanizing activities that make one wonder if they deserve such punishment. What about you? Do you think they are deserving of those acts because of their crimes? Let us know. Number 5. Evin Prison, Iran. Reports and testimonies of former inmates of Evin Prison is enough to send chills down anyone's spine. While most prisons face the issue of overcrowding and its associated problems, Evin Prison has a different kind of problem, with its inmates being victims of extreme torture, often for the extraction of information, or for no concrete reason. Located in northern Tehran, Iran, it was established in 1972 under the reign of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the last Shah of Iran. The prison's notoriety grew following the Iranian Revolution of 1979 as the new regime intensified its crackdown on opposition, and thus, Evin became synonymous with severe human rights abuses, with numerous reports of brutal interrogations and torture. Physical and psychological torture is common, with methods including beatings, solitary confinement, mock executions, and sexual abuse. Legal rights are frequently disregarded, with many inmates denied fair trials or legal representation, resulting in arbitrary and harsh sentences. High-profile incidents like the 1988 prison massacre, where thousands of political prisoners were executed, remains one of the most egregious examples of the prison's brutality, and is one of the situations that brought global attention to the prison. The case of Zahra Kazemi, a Canadian-Iranian journalist who died in Evan after being tortured, highlighted the extreme measures used against detainees. Human rights lawyer Nasrin Sotoudeh's repeated imprisonments for her activism have also underscored the ongoing repression. These cases, among others, have attracted significant media coverage and criticism from the international community, leading to sanctions and further scrutiny of Iran's human rights record. Number 4. Diyarbakir Prison, Turkey. Diyarbakir Prison, located in southeastern Turkey, gained infamy for its brutal conditions and harsh treatment of inmates, especially during the 1980s and 1990s. Built and opened after the 1980 military coup, it quickly became a primary detention center for Kurdish activists, political dissidents, and alleged members of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK. The prison was famous for severe overcrowding, with inmates crammed into small, unsanitary cells. The lack of proper food and medical care increased the suffering, leading to widespread disease and malnutrition. Reports from this period showcase extreme torture methods, including beatings, electric shocks, etc. One of the most harrowing aspects of Diyarbakir Prison was the death corridor, a section of the prison infamous for the torture and executions carried out there. The 1982 hunger strikes by Kurdish prisoners brought international attention to the prison's conditions, resulting in several inmate deaths. These strikes brought to light the prisoners' desperation and the extreme measures they were willing to take to protest their treatment. Despite the global outcry, the Turkish government at the time did little to address these abuses, allowing the situation to continue largely unabated. Although some reforms have been made in recent years, issues such as overcrowding and poor conditions still remains in many Turkish prisons, including Diyarbakir. Human rights organizations continue to monitor these conditions and advocate for improvements, underscoring the importance of upholding human rights standards in detention facilities. Number 3. Mendoza Prison, Argentina. Mendoza Prison, officially known as Prison Number 1 of Mendoza, Argentina, has garnered a notorious reputation due to several critical issues plaguing its operations. One of the primary concerns is severe overcrowding, which has led to deplorable living conditions for inmates. Overcrowding often results in insufficient access to basic necessities, such as sanitation facilities, healthcare services, and adequate living space, exacerbating tensions among the inmate population. This overcrowding also contributes to an environment ripe for violence and gang activity, an issue that further compromises the safety and well-being of both inmates and prison staff. Organizations have consistently raised alarms about Mendoza Prison's treatment of inmates. Reports of abuse, including physical violence and neglect, highlight the dangerous conditions within the facility. Inmates often face challenges accessing legal representation and medical care, another problem that also increases their vulnerability. Meanwhile, the prison's shortcomings in providing effective rehabilitation programs further compound these issues and limits efforts to reduce recidivism and prepare inmates for successful reintegration into society upon their release. Number 2. Gani Prison, Georgia. Gani Prison in Tbilisi, Georgia, became infamous after the 2012 scandal that exposed human rights violations against the inmates. Video footage revealed shocking scenes of inmates being physically beaten and sexually abused by prison guards. This revelation sparked widespread outrage both domestically and internationally, prompting calls for immediate reforms within Georgia's prison system. The incidents at Gani exposed systemic issues such as lack of oversight, abuse of power by prison officials, and inadequate conditions for inmates. In response to the scandal, Georgia initiated efforts to reform its prison system, including improvements at Gani Prison. These reforms aimed to enhance transparency, accountability, and conditions within the facility. Measures included increased monitoring of prison operations, training for staff on human rights standards, and efforts to reduce overcrowding through legal reforms. While progress has been made in some areas, The abuse at Gani underscores ongoing challenges in ensuring humane treatment and adequate conditions for prisoners in Georgia. Number 1. Maracaibo Prison, Venezuela. Venezuela's Maracaibo prison system is globally notorious for its severe overcrowding, with 3,700 inmates crammed into a facility built for only 700. One can only imagine what it is like in such conditions. Chronic understaffing, where there's just one guard for every 150 inmates, coupled with limited funding, severely impedes efforts to maintain order. In Maracaibo, violent gangs dominate, turning the prison into a lawless and perilous place. Basic necessities such as food are inadequate, and living conditions are appalling, with hygiene and cleanliness often ignored as inmates face daily struggles to survive in an environment that lacks the fundamental elements required for humane living. The relentless cycle of violence in La Sabaneta persists due to frequent clashes among inmates, driven by the unbearable stress and frustration stemming from the harsh conditions. The combination of overcrowding, resource scarcity, and rampant violence makes La Sabaneta Prison an exceptionally dangerous and challenging environment. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.